Hello people of the internet, it's Amanda, and for today's video, we're here to talk about the One Piece live-action adaptation on Netflix. Now, there was a lot of buzz surrounding this one because when it was announced, a lot of people were already very skeptical about Western production companies taking over or doing productions of mangas and animes, especially with Netflix, just zooming in on Netflix specifically, with their recent flop being the Cowboy Bebop live-action adaptation. And then they also did that horrible Death Note Western version a couple of years ago, which to this day I still think is their biggest crime to date. But a lot of people really started to look forward to this one, especially when they released, the casting. It includes Makenyu, who J-drama, Asian drama fans know more of his work in more Japanese movies and dramas. Obviously, he's been in other Hollywood stints before, but if we're talking about, him leading casts or something, it's mostly focused on his work in the Japanese entertainment industry. And then they cast a lot of fresh faces for this one as well. But I think the biggest catch or the biggest thing that happened for this series was when Eiichiro Oda, who is the creator of One Piece, gave his approval of the series and how it's developing. And so it gave fans a lot of hope, as to how this adaptation is going to turn out, and that really set the tone in terms of the anticipation for this series. Now, that said, to address the elephant in the room, I'm going to review the series from the perspective of someone who hasn't really seen a single episode of the anime, who hasn't seen a single chapter of the manga, and who only knows One Piece and Monkey D. Luffy as a character, simply because it's just one of those things that if you're into Japanese pop culture, it's one of those things that just you're conscious that it's there. You don't necessarily have to know anything about it, everything about it, but you know that it exists, its traction and popularity, and that's where I'm coming from this POV of just watching this series. So just to put it out there in case I get comments again saying blah blah blah, this is how it is in anime, manga, whatever. So yeah. Now, since I'm coming from that particular standpoint, I also made sure not to watch any other interviews or anything like that would kind of influence my experience of watching the series prior to me actually watching it. So aside from, some clips that I've been seeing online about the cast and everything, I didn't really dive deep into waiting for this series, and even after it, I tried as much as possible not to look for any other reviews that publications are putting out so far aside from headlines, which I'll be discussing more of later, but rather I tried to ask the opinions of some fans as well, what are their thoughts, because again, I made it clear that as someone who isn't aware of, what the anime and the manga is like and all these things. So how exactly is that working out? And so I got a couple of opinions. Some have said that, there are certain characters that they feel felt very lacking. I got one opinion saying that Usopp's character felt lacking in terms of acting, and then another one, I think a couple of comments said that they kind of felt Iñaki Godoy playing Luffy needs to step it up a little bit more or anything like that, but it wasn't as bad. There are also kinds of certain commentaries about how they understand how difficult it is to compress so many episodes or so many chapters in just a couple of 8 episodes in total. But overall, most of the things that I've gathered from fans of the anime within, the people that I've asked, they said that it's a very favorable adaptation, which I think is really good. I think I rely on the perspective of fans more as compared to more formal critical reviews and media, because they tend to throw the term live action curse a lot, which I also plan to discuss more later into this video, because I do have a lot of opinions about that particular phrase that a lot of Western media loves to throw around when it comes to, you know, these kinds of things. So yeah, I want to start off by talking about, you know, each of the members of the Straw Hat crew, because I feel like, again, most of the story revolved around these characters, and while there's so many things that could go into a certain production, characterization, especially for the main cast, has a lot to do with how a work is going to be received. And I'm gonna start doing it backwards from when they became members of, you know, the crew. So starting off with Taz Skylar as Sanji. So the character's dream is to be the best chef and to find the all blue. And I think they did a really good job in terms of casting Sanji. Just visuals wise, there's a sense of, I don't know what it is, but there's just a sense of his look that has this very anime vibe to it. I'm not sure if that's making sense, but you know how it is when anime, there's a Western like character that you kind of like, I don't know, there's just something about how he looks that feels like he really embodies what it looks like to be an anime personified. And yeah, and I think his acting is really good as well. I really loved his chemistry with the actor who played Zeph. I like his entire storyline and everything about it. I like that he was able to capture the charismatic vibe of the character that he's playing. He's not coming off as this like I know, like sleazy playboy kind of thing, and but comes off more as someone who's just, you know, who has this kind of like flair in the things that he does and all these things. And I feel like, you know, that really works well for his character. Moving on to Jacob Romero as Usopp. So his character has a knack for, you know, making things more grandiose than what it really is, and he usually makes himself the star of the stories that he's doing. He's kind of like this bard character. I feel like there's definitely, I'm not sure, again, since I'm not familiar with like the source material, but I feel like, you know, his character is very underutilized in the 8-episode span. I do feel like a lot of characters have been fleshed out a little bit more, especially when we're talking about the Straw Hat crew as compared to his character. And I like that he kind of like has this nice balance between him and Luffy when it comes to being these like kind of like airhead characters in a way, to some extent. But yeah, I just do feel like his character is a little bit underutilized as compared to the others, and there's definitely a lot more of like dimension in terms of the other characters, or maybe just, I don't know if like it's also down to like the screen time or anything like that, because it did have like a couple of episodes to his story as well, like a lot missing in terms of his character. So yeah, next one is Emily Rudd as Nami. She's my favorite. I think Emily Rudd did an amazing performance as Nami. She has this equal mix of realism and also like the caricature vibe of her character. Adapting it from, you know, it's an anime slash manga, transforming it into a live action adaptation. She did such a good job in terms of balancing that, and there's also a lot of nuance in her acting, which I'll probably dive deep into later. Even the younger version of her, I think, is the best actor among the child version bunch that they got. And that kid reminds me so much of Kirsten Dunst as, you know, in Interview as a Vampire, just putting it out there. But I think overall, I like her, I just like her performance overall. And I think she did a really good job in terms of creating this balance of personality in a way between the rest of the crew. And yeah, I think most of the scenes where she's in are some of my favorites. So there. Then next one is Makenyu as Roro no Azoro. So people who are into J-dramas probably watch this series to know how he's gonna perform in this one. He looks absolutely good as Zoro. Performance wise, some of the works of Makinyu that I've seen in the past, he has this very similar characterizations, with someone very stoic, someone very, I don't know, like there's very little emotional tug to many of the characters that he's played. Like I've seen him in Todome no Kiss. He's also in Rurouni Kenshin. So for people who's discovering him just now, there's the Rurouni Kenshin series to check out as well, and he's there in the final installments of the franchise. And yeah, like even before in Asia, in J dramas, J movies, he's not exactly my favorite actor. But his performance in this one, I feel like, it just fits simply because grasping the character of Zoro, just based on what I've seen, he has this very like stoic, flat kind of like humor and delivery to him, which I feel like Makinyu did a good job anyways. But I'll dive deep more into the performances in my overall comments. But yeah, overall I think he did a good job. I think in terms of the stunts and everything, since he has experience doing all these things for like the other stage projects that he's done, and also with Rurouni Kenshin, he did a good job in terms of adding credibility to the fight scenes that he was in. And yeah. And then before I jump into Iñaki Godoy as Luffy, I also want to include Morgan Davis as Kobe. So he's not exactly part of the Straw Hat crew, but I want to talk more about his character as well, simply because they the storytelling for this particular series kind of like branches out between his character and also Luffy's character, so that we kind of see more of the perspective of the Marines as well. And I do think that he did such a good job in terms of playing into this kind of like Armin type character in reference to Attack on Titan, where he has this very kind of like kind, gentle disposition to him, but he's also very smart, and he has ambition, and he has this dream. And it kind of like, again, contrasts the personality of Luffy, who is a lot more, determined, nonchalant, happy-go-lucky, whereas for he's an overthinker. He has a lot of self-doubt and stuff like that, and eventually I feel like he will grow into the role as is being shown in the narrative. So it's just kind of like interesting that they went about that, and I like that the actor who played Kobe was able to portray that character really well, of providing a good contrast to moving on to our final Straw Hat crew member, who's the captain, and the main character of the series, Iñaki Godoy as a Monkey D. Luffy. Now, I think that, when I first saw a video of him prior, like before, when they were just marketing this entire thing, he reminded me so much of Tom Holland. They both have this kind of like puppy dog energy to them, and I feel like that really helped in terms of his portrayal as Luffy. And I've seen some comments saying, that they could have made him dumber in a way, but honestly I feel like there's just some things that don't translate well in live action, and that could probably make some characters feel a lot more unbearable than who they are as compared to if they're an anime or a manga character. And that's what I felt like when it comes to Iñaki Godoy's performance. I do feel like he made a very interesting character in a way that you kind of like root for him, because he's just this someone who's very nonchalant, who's straightforward, who has this like weird disposition about the way that he goes about things. But it doesn't really go into different contrasts when he becomes serious and determined in terms of, helping out his friends. And I do feel like that kind of like balance in showing two sides of him is made effective in terms of how they did the character. So he wasn't so over the top stupid or dumb or anything like that. And so that made him a little bit more likable in a sense. And because because in live action, I do feel like if you make a character extra dumb, especially if they're the main character, people are just gonna end up, hating them eventually. And I do feel like, with the performance that they did, that they gave Luffy for this live action adaptation, it was just the right balance of everything. Like, there's a sense of childishness in him, but it also wasn't too childish that he can't be trusted to actually become the leader of this band of like misfits, so it's just a good balance of both, in my opinion. And it made me like understand why a lot of people like Luffy as a character from the perspective of someone who hasn't seen the anime or the manga. It made me understand why this series has so much appeal to the original audience that it has, because of the main character alone, or because of, like, even in the earlier like episodes 1 and 2, it made me appreciate why people like Luffy because of the performance of Iñaki Godoy. So yeah. Other recurring characters in this series include Vice Admiral Garp, Buggy the Clown, Shanks, and Helmeppo. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I mean, I've watched the entire 8 episodes, but usually whenever I see that character, I just laugh at what Zoro did to him. So yeah. Now that we're done with the characters, let's move on to my actual thoughts about, the series in general, starting with Usopp, Luffy, and Zoro all feeling emotionally constipated, at least from my perspective. I mean, there is one way to play, not being able to show your emotions properly, like there's some restraint to it or anything like that. But there's a way to go about that with some nuance in terms of acting. And Nami, again, Emily Rudd did such a good job in most of the scenes for her depicting that kind of like indifference to something, but still in her eyes and her emotions, just facial expressions, you were able to see that there's a conflict happening inside of her, even if it's not exactly explicitly being said or being shown. There's a nuance in there. There's also that scene with Zeph and Sanji a couple of times where, they don't know how to express their feelings to each other, of how they really care about each other in sort of like this father and son kind of like relationship. But they were able to like portray that effectively as well, without it being in the dialogue or anything like that. To me, in the scenes where Usopp, Luffy, and Zoro has to show a little bit more of like that push in terms of emotion, kind of lacks. Like, for example, when Zoro was stuck in the well, and he was like calling back to his past of what happened to his friend and why he is so determined to be the best swordsman, whatever. There's just something there that if it weren't for the flashbacks, I wouldn't understand what's going on with him. Like, there's nothing you can read through Makanyu's eyes during those scenes. I mean, I understand that, again, the essence of his character is a stoicism to him, but there's a difference between stoicism and just not being able to play off the nuance of the emotion of the character. Same goes when Zoro was injured and then Luffy was kind of like struggling to talk to him or to say that, I need you and all these things, like, you're my friend, etc. That felt kind of like a stage play-ish moment. Like, Iñaki Godoy was kind of like just delivering his lines as is, but there's just nothing in there. I don't know, I'm just big on eye acting. I think I've talked about this in my previous videos, but there's definitely a lot there that could be fleshed out a little bit more on the acting department. Yeah. And then another thing is that I feel like some of the backstories felt more fleshed out, like Nami and Sanji versus Usopp and Zoro. So yeah, and I feel like, yeah, with Usopp and Zoro, we kind of like understand already what their stories are going to be about. It's just that, I don't know, like it just feels like some of the stories were kind of like delivered a lot better. And again, I'm not sure, this is coming from, again, an uninitiated perspective about these characters in this series. But yeah, I feel like, there's kind of like an imbalance in terms of how they want us to root for these characters based from their backstories. And I feel like some of them could have been, it's more of like a storytelling manner. I don't know. Anyways, so moving on to the pros. The lore was easy to understand, even for the non-initiated. Again, for me, I was initially able to like just grasp the idea of it. And I think it's because the reason why it worked out as well is because pirates is such a Western concept, as compared to, say, if we're making a live action adaptation of like Naruto or something where the context is very Japanese, and then translating that into putting Western characters there. I don't think that would have like made a better sense. But then for this one, since it's pirates and all these things, like getting Western actors playing these kinds of like roles really played off to the advantage of the narrative, which is great. And I was watching this with my mom, by the way, and she usually gets disinterested, especially when it comes to like these kind of thing narratives. But she enjoyed the series as well, and she knows nothing about the One Piece anime and manga aside from Luffy as a character, because we've seen a couple of his photos when we went to Japan a couple of times, and that's the only familiarity that she has with the character. But she was able to like enjoy the series and understand who these characters are, where they're coming from, and just the entire narrative of it, which is a good sign in terms of just storytelling in general. Number two, I think they did a good job in terms of reiterating that these characters band together because they have a certain goal, which is to reach their individual dreams. And sometimes it can get cheesy talking about you should pursue your dream, follow your dream, whatever. But because they made it so that each and every character has that as their goal and purpose, and that made the narrative a little bit more linear and cleaner and cohesive, it definitely worked out to their advantage. And again, even if like that entire idea is cheesy, especially in a live action context of these people pining over hopes and dreams, etc., in a way that in dialogue that is very anime-ish or I don't know, cartoonish in a way, it still worked out because they were able to stick to that particular element of the story all throughout. Next one is they did a really good job in terms of the casting choices in a way that it didn't feel ridiculous to watch. And I think it really like props to the production staff and the casting director and directors and just the behind the scenes staff that of this series. They really you feel that they put in the effort to cast people for these roles, because no one stuck out like a sore thumb in a way that was so horrible that it made it unwatchable, like you want to skip some parts of it. Not really. And that boils down to them casting really good people for portraying these things. And even if there are some stuff that feels very theatrical and all these things, because these actors committed to the roles that they are playing, you're able to just jump into and immerse yourselves into the ridiculousness of it, which is usually just familiar when you're watching, Japanese live action adaptations of Japanese works. Like, for example, for me, I've seen a lot of like live action adaptations where Japanese actors are starring Japanese actors, and it works because you kind of know like that this is the thing, this is part of the entertainment industry in Japan. And sometimes it just doesn't work when you get Western actors doing these things. Again, there's this entire thing of live action adaptations made by Western companies, played by Western actors, not working out. And again, when you do a very extensive casting process for roles, this is a result. Another thing that I like about it, just on a cinematography perspective, the fisheye and the low angle shots. Again, as I mentioned, as much as I'm not familiar with like One Piece, the manga, or the anime, I am well aware of like how ridiculously proportioned the characters are drawn in a way. And I think this is a good nod to that. Like those shots where, like it's so weird that the characters kind of like look distorted, especially if it's super close up. That's just like a good reference to the proportions and the ridiculousness of the way the characters are drawn, how unrealistic the characters are drawn in terms of the art of the original, of the source material. And I really like that. It also adds to the charm of the series in a way that, you're immersed in the scene, and you kind of like just visually remember that this is an over the top production, with this, and it matches the world building of just generally with everything very colorful, pops of color, the costuming, everything. It just adds a little bit of like extra snap to how everything looks, and I really like that. In terms of performances, I would say I really like the best ones for me would definitely be Emily Rudd's Nami and Jeff Ward's Buggy the Clown. One of my favorite episodes would definitely be episode 2, where they were dealing with Buggy the Clown. I don't know, I just really like everything that went into that. And yeah, and as annoying as his character is, I just enjoy the performance there, the commitment of Jeff Ward to his character. And other things that I really like about this, which I feel like is very vital when it comes to, how it is with any other live action adaptations or just any other work in general, is it also covered themes on corruption, on prejudice when it came to like the fishmen versus the humans, older generations' refusal to kind of like listen to new blood in a way, which is seen in both, with the Marines and also to some extent the pirates, where any fresh kind of like ideas or a different POV on certain things gets kind of like that gets discouraged, at least initially. And then there's also the concept of what's right versus what's just, especially when it comes to the characters of Luffy and also Kobe as a character, dealing with, knowing that Luffy's intentions are good and everything, but it also stands with his duty as a Marine to like catch these pirates, or all these things. So it definitely was able to inject important messages into the narrative without straying away from the adventure vibe of the entire thing, which I really like. Now we've gotten those out of the way, let's talk about the live action curse that the Western media seems to love to throw around, especially when it came to the reviews of these series. Now, as much as possible, I didn't read through the reviews in detail. I just looked at, just a general vibe of One Piece reviews so far, just to get an idea as to what people are saying about this. And one of the things that I keep seeing is how people are saying that it broke the live action curse. Now, the live action curse refers to how live action adaptations are fails recently, when it comes to, because it's so difficult to create like an animated work or a manga and transform it into live action. It's basically just that. Most of the references include, again, the Death Note adaptation by Netflix a couple of years ago, Cowboy Bebop, all these things. But I kind of like understand if they only refer to the live action curse as something that is produced by Western productions or a certain platform, in this case Netflix. However, if they start referring to the live action curse as this thing that has been occurring for so long, etc., and that calling One Piece as kind of like the solution for that, that's where I have a certain problem. And the thing with that is, I feel like that's just completely ignorant on the part of these media publications to say that, because there's definitely a lot of live action adaptations that are really good. I feel like they just never really paid attention to it because it's just within, the Japanese entertainment industry so far. I do think that the Death Note 2006 version, and even the one on Netflix right now, which is the 2015 version, so like that version of Death Note there, and then the 2006 version, I do think that those are really good examples of how live action adaptations are when handled properly. And yeah, like I agree, like there's to some extent a sense of cringiness in some of live action adaptations, but it's more of like the idea of commitment to the characters, the world building, translating the world that is an anime into real life, and that's definitely challenging. I understand as well that even the Attack on Titan live action films before, I personally didn't like those. But it's just one of the many examples of, how it is. We just have to talk about, there are bad films, there are good films, and just move on from that. There's no such thing as a live action curse. Again, it all boils down to production, to script. It doesn't have anything to do with who's producing what, whether it's a Western, it's produced by Western companies or anything, or Japanese production companies, etc. It doesn't matter who's helming what in terms of writing, directing. It all just boils down to good films and bad films, and we just should just refer to it as such. Because again, there are a lot of live action adaptations that are real good. Again, as I mentioned, the Death Note adaptation so far. Aside from the Light Up the New World, I personally didn't like that one. That one was really boring. But the ones that follow the original storyline with Light and L, really like the adaptations for those so far. Rurouni Kenshin franchise, best, I think, still the best live action adaptation for me. What else? There's definitely a lot. And yeah, I mean, and even like the shoujo ones, the shoujo storylines that have live action adaptations. Hello, Alice in Borderland is a live action adaptation technically because it's basing from source material. It's just that, I feel like I have so many issues with people calling a live action curse, because live action is basically adapting something from a source material that isn't an original screenplay. That's basically it. So yeah. So again, am I saying that One Piece isn't the best live action adaptation? I think definitely there are a lot of, again, live action adaptations out there, especially like for me, Rurouni Kenshin is still the best. But they did such a good job for this one as well. I would call it like a good live action adaptation and a good series. That's it. But there's like the entire curse thing. I just find it absolutely ridiculous. I just feel like these people should widen their horizons in terms of watching something or reading something, or I don't know, just something going through, adapting something, So they just widen their horizons and not call every single thing as, this niche kind of thing just to label something. But yeah. So yeah. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you want to hear more from me, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you again soon in a new one. Bye!